The headlines scream that Trump just approved 5 new guns for 2026. You've seen them. Bold claims, clickbait outrage, gun control groups melting down, Second Amendment advocates celebrating. And almost none of it is true, not the way it's being sold to you. This isn't about 5 firearms getting some presidential stamp of approval like Trump sat in the Oval Office with a catalog, checking off makes and models. What actually happened is bigger, more consequential, and far more complicated than any headline wants to admit. We're talking about a full-scale dismantling of federal gun regulations that have been choking civilian ownership for decades. Entire categories of firearms and accessories that were buried under bureaucratic red tape, punitive taxes, and arbitrary enforcement just got freed. And whether you think that's the greatest defense of constitutional rights in a generation or a reckless abandonment of public safety, you need to understand what really changed. Because the truth isn't about 5 guns, it's about millions of them. It's about who controls access, who decides what's legal, and whether the regulatory framework that's been built over 90 years still holds up under constitutional scrutiny. This is what's actually happening in 2026, and you're not getting the real story anywhere else. Before we go any further, let me be direct. If you care about understanding gun policy instead of just reacting to headlines, if you want to know what these regulatory changes actually mean for ordinary Americans, if you believe that truth matters more than narrative, subscribe to this channel right now. Not because I'm selling you fear, not because I'm picking a political side, but because what's happening right now with firearms regulation is being wildly misrepresented on all sides, and you deserve information that doesn't treat you like an idiot. This channel cuts through the noise, breaks down the legal reality, and gives you the tools to make informed decisions about rights, safety, and policy. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and commit to being informed instead of manipulated. Millions of Americans are forming opinions based on incomplete information or outright lies. Don't be one of them. Let's start with what reopened the floodgates: braced AR pistols. If you're not deep in the firearms world, here's what these are. Compact AR-15 style weapons with short barrels, no traditional stock, and a stabilizing brace designed to wrap around your forearm. They're lightweight, maneuverable, perfect for home defense or vehicle carry. For years, these configurations were completely legal and massively popular among gun owners who wanted the stopping power of a rifle platform in a more compact package. Then came 2023, and the Biden administration's ATF dropped the hammer. They reclassified most braced pistols as short-barreled rifles, which meant they fell under the National Firearms Act. Overnight, millions of gun owners were told that the legal firearm they'd purchased, the one sitting in their safe that was perfectly lawful when they bought it, now required mandatory registration, a $200 tax stamp, mountains of paperwork, and approval delays that stretched for months. The justification was officer safety and closing loopholes, but the practical effect was criminalizing millions of Americans who hadn't changed their behavior at all. The law changed underneath them. Lawsuits erupted immediately because this wasn't just regulatory overreach. It was the ATF rewriting statutory definitions without congressional authority. The case that mattered was Mock versus Garland, and by mid-2025, everything shifted. Trump's Department of Justice quietly withdrew its appeal, allowing a federal court ruling to stand. That ruling struck down the brace ban, and with the appeal dropped, it applied nationwide. Translation: braced pistols are no longer treated like NFA items. No tax stamp, no registration, no waiting months for permission to own what you already legally possessed. The Firearms Policy Coalition called it a massive constitutional victory. Manufacturers like Maxim Defense, who bankrolled the legal battle, celebrated it as a turning point in Second Amendment protections. But gun control groups lost their minds. Some claimed this would lead to de facto machine guns flooding the streets. That's objectively false. These are still semi-automatic firearms, not full-auto weapons, but it shows how hysterical the response became. Here's the bottom line. Millions of braced AR pistols that were stuck in legal limbo, where owners faced potential felony charges for non-compliance, are now back in circulation without federal restrictions. Gun shops are restocking them. Owners who registered under duress are exploring whether they can reverse that registration. And for the first time since 2023, you can walk into a store, buy a braced pistol, and walk out the same day without federal paperwork. Whether you think that's a restoration of rights or a dangerous deregulation, it's the reality on the ground right now. Now let's talk about the $200 tax stamp, because this is where financial punishment meets constitutional rights. For nearly a century, since 1934, owning a suppressor, a short-barreled rifle, or a short-barreled shotgun meant paying an extra $200 to the federal government on top of whatever you already spent on the item itself. It didn't matter if your suppressor cost $900 or your SBR was a custom build you put together yourself. Uncle Sam wanted his cut, and that fee has never been adjusted for inflation. It's been sitting at $200 since the Great Depression, which in today's money would be over $4,000. Think about that. The government set a prohibitive tax in 1934 designed to price poor people out of certain firearms, and they just left it there, unchanged, for 90 years. It was never about safety. It was about access. It was about making sure only people with money could afford to jump through the hoops, and all of that just changed. In 2025, Congress passed a sweeping firearms reform package, and Trump signed it on July 4th. Tucked inside that legislation was the elimination of the federal excise tax on suppressors, short-barreled rifles, short-barreled shotguns, and certain other NFA items. Gone. Zeroed out. You still go through background checks. You still register with the ATF, but that $200 gate fee? History. Let's put this in perspective. A family buying suppressors for 3 rifles just saved $600. A competitive shooter building an NFA collection could save thousands. And that's not even counting the time saved from faster processing under the new streamlined rules, because the ATF also overhauled Form 4 procedures to reduce approval times. The National Shooting Sports Foundation called this a generational breakthrough, one of the most meaningful ways to level the playing field for lawful gun owners. And they're not wrong. The suppressor market, which many considered niche because of the cost and bureaucratic barriers, is now projected to explode in 2026. Manufacturers are scaling production. Retailers are seeing order volumes they've never seen before. For years, people hesitated to buy suppressors simply because of the extra cost and delay. Now that barrier is gone, at least at the federal level, and the market is responding. Of course, not everyone is celebrating. Opponents like Congressman Mike Thompson argued this move was about boosting profits for the gun industry, not public safety. Some gun control advocates claim that more suppressors in circulation will complicate law enforcement's ability to detect gunfire during active shooter situations. But let's be clear about what suppressors actually do. They don't make firearms silent like in the movies. They reduce noise to safer levels, particularly for hearing protection. A suppressed gunshot is still loud, around 130 to 140 decibels, roughly equivalent to a jackhammer. It's not stealthy, it's just less likely to cause permanent hearing damage. And the legal process for obtaining one still includes full federal registration and background checks. This isn't handing out silencers like candy. It's removing a punitive tax that served no public safety function and existed purely as a financial barrier. For millions of Americans who want to protect their hearing while exercising their Second Amendment rights, that's a concrete, measurable win. And it's reshaping the market in real time. Now we get into the category that's making dealers restock and rights groups cheer: personal defense weapons and exotic builds. We're talking about compact, high-performance firearms like the SIG MPX, the CZ Scorpion Evo, HK MP5 clones, and the Ruger PC carbine. These are platforms that blur the line between pistol and rifle, chambered in 9mm or intermediate rifle calibers, designed for close-quarters defense and tactical applications. Under the old system, these firearms danced on the edge of legality. You could buy them, but only if they followed strict specifications. If the barrel length dropped under 16 inches or the overall length fell below 26 inches, it became a short-barreled rifle under federal law, triggering all the NFA headaches: registration, tax stamps, waiting periods. People got creative, using stabilizing braces as legal workarounds to keep these guns classified as pistols. But even that flexibility got stripped away during the Biden-era restrictions on braces. Fast forward to now. The brace ban is gone. The $200 tax stamp for SBRs is eliminated. And just like that, the regulatory doors blew open. You can now configure these PDW-style firearms however you want. Add a stock, shorten the barrel, fine-tune for home defense, build it for your specific needs, all without getting tangled in regulations that were written before these platforms even existed. Want to drop a collapsible stock on a CZ Scorpion and run it like a professional close-quarters battle setup? You can. Prefer to leave it in braced pistol form? That's legal again too. What we're witnessing is a complete regulatory reset. Firearms that sat in legal gray zones, where manufacturers were afraid to release certain configurations because the ATF might arbitrarily reclassify them, are now fully above board. And it's not just the common models. Niche and exotic builds, belt-fed uppers, ultra-short PDW kits, military-style configurations that were once the exclusive domain of Special Operations or NFA collectors, are getting the green light in ways we haven't seen since before the National Firearms Act took hold. The industry is already moving. Firearm manufacturers are pulling out shelved designs that were too risky to release under the old regulatory regime. Prototypes that sat in R&D limbo are being fast-tracked to production. It's not hyperbole to say we're entering a potential golden age of civilian firearms innovation, from compact home defense setups to full tactical builds. The creativity floodgates just opened, and the market is responding. To bring some order to this, the ATF under Trump's direction established a formal classification board. No more guessing games. No more contradictory rulings from different field agents where one examiner says a design is legal and another says it's a felony. New firearm designs now go through a centralized process that offers consistent, transparent decisions. That didn't exist before, and it's why entire product lines got buried in red tape or pulled from the market after years of sales because some ATF agent decided the rules changed. Now there's a playbook, now there's accountability. And let's be real, Trump didn't walk into a press conference and personally approve some futuristic weapon by name. What his administration did was bigger than that. They tore down regulatory walls that had boxed in innovation and civilian access for decades. In doing so, they gave ordinary gun owners access to options that were once restricted to law enforcement, military, or wealthy NFA collectors willing to pay the fees and wait the months. This isn't just about cool gear or looking tactical, it's about choice. It's about the ability to build a firearm setup that actually fits your needs, whether that's home defense, competitive shooting, or just exercising your constitutional rights, without needing to pay hundreds of dollars, wait half a year, and pray the regulatory landscape doesn't shift underneath you again. Now let's step into the real controversy zone: forced reset triggers. These are drop-in trigger assemblies for AR platform rifles that allow incredibly fast follow-up shots. They're not automatic fire, but they're close. After each round fires, the trigger forcibly resets forward, and if you maintain pressure, it fires again almost instantly. Technically, it still requires one trigger pull per shot, which is the legal definition of semi-automatic. But to most shooters, the experience feels shockingly close to full auto. Under the Biden administration, the ATF treated these devices like contraband. Between 2022 and 2023, they classified FRTs as illegal machine guns, which triggered surprise inspections, high-profile raids on companies like Rare Breed Triggers, mass seizures of inventory, and even threats of prosecution against regular buyers who installed them in their rifles. It was aggressive, heavy-handed enforcement targeting a product that existed in a legal gray area but had never been legislatively banned by Congress. Gun rights groups pushed back hard, arguing that FRTs don't meet the statutory definition of a machine gun because the trigger still moves independently for each shot. They pointed to Cargill versus Garland, where a federal court ruled the ATF had overstepped its authority in a similar case involving bump stocks. The legal argument was simple. If Congress wanted to ban these devices, Congress needed to pass a law. The ATF couldn't just redefine statutory terms to criminalize products retroactively. Then came May 2025, and Trump's Department of Justice dropped a legal bombshell. Rather than continue defending the ATF's position, they settled the major FRT lawsuits and agreed to stop enforcing the ban. On top of that, the government agreed to return seized FRTs to their rightful owners, which is almost unheard of in federal enforcement cases. But they did draw one clear line. FRTs remain prohibited for use in handguns. The reasoning is obvious. An FRT in an AR pistol or Glock-style build would create a small, concealable weapon capable of firing at near-automatic rates, which raises legitimate concerns for law enforcement and public safety. The manufacturers agreed not to market FRTs for pistol applications, and that restriction stands. So where does that leave us? As of right now, you can legally install a forced reset trigger in your AR-15 rifle. No tax stamp, no NFA paperwork, no federal agents showing up at your door. That means millions of existing rifles can now be upgraded to cycle almost as fast as military-grade M4s, while still remaining technically semi-automatic under federal law. Gun rights advocates wasted no time declaring victory. Dudley Brown from the National Association for Gun Rights called it a landmark rollback of unconstitutional overreach and one of the biggest wins in years. And they might have a point. For years, the ATF was expanding its definition of machine gun far beyond what the statute actually says, effectively legislating through enforcement. This reversal marks a clear check on that power. On the other side, gun control groups erupted. Giffords and the Brady campaign issued statements accusing the Trump administration of opening the door to weapons of war on American streets. Gabby Giffords herself warned that lives would be lost, arguing that these triggers give ordinary rifles battlefield-level rates of fire with almost no oversight. And let's be honest, when you hear a rifle equipped with an FRT dump a magazine at the range, it does sound like a machine gun. To some people, that's thrilling. To others, it's terrifying. But here's the legal reality. One pull, one shot. That's still the standard. FRTs may blur the line in terms of sound and speed, but under the law as written by Congress, they're still semi-automatic. The difference now is that the federal government agrees, at least when it comes to rifles. Whether you see this as a breakthrough for freedom or a reckless invitation for abuse depends entirely on where you stand on gun rights. But either way, it's official. Forced reset triggers are no longer in the ATF's crosshairs, and for many in the Second Amendment community, that represents a massive shift in how the government approaches firearms regulation. So let's set the record straight once and for all, because this is where the truth diverges completely from the headlines. No, President Trump did not sign an executive order approving 5 specific guns by name. There is no secret memo. There is no presidential list of makes and models that got the official stamp of approval for 2026. If you went searching through executive orders, congressional records, or ATF rulings hoping to find a catalog of newly legalized firearms, you'd come up empty, because that's not what happened. The real story is much bigger than 5 individual guns. What actually occurred was a sweeping legal and policy shift that changed the landscape for entire categories of firearms and accessories. Trump's administration, backed by key legislative moves in Congress and strategic decisions by the Department of Justice, rolled back layers of federal gun regulations that had accumulated over decades, and in doing so, they didn't just clear 5 models for sale. They opened the gates for millions of firearms that had been boxed in by bureaucratic red tape, punitive taxation, and arbitrary enforcement. It's the difference between pardoning 5 prisoners and unlocking the doors to an entire cell block. Let's break down what actually changed. Braced AR pistols are now treated like regular handguns again. with no NFA registration or tax stamp required. Suppressors, short-barreled rifles, and short-barreled shotguns no longer carry the $200 federal penalty. Personal defense weapons and exotic builds are back in action with the brace ban reversed and cost barriers eliminated. Forced reset triggers, which were previously classified as illegal machine guns, are now allowed on rifles with clear restrictions on handgun use. But it doesn't stop there. Trump's DOJ and ATF didn't just step back, they actively restructured the regulatory system. A formal classification board was created to evaluate new firearm designs with consistency and transparency, ending the era of contradictory rulings from different field agents. They overhauled burdensome administrative processes like ATF Form 20, transforming what used to be weeks of waiting for interstate firearm transport permissions into a simple notification system. And behind the scenes, they've begun a comprehensive review of every major rule on the books to identify and eliminate regulations that no longer hold up under constitutional scrutiny or serve any legitimate public safety function. The shift is real, it's massive, and it's being felt across the entire firearms industry and ownership community. For gun rights supporters, this is being celebrated as the most significant Second Amendment victory in a generation. Some advocates are calling it the biggest rollback of federal gun control since 1934, when the National Firearms Act was first passed in response to gangster violence during Prohibition. On the other side, gun control organizations see these changes as reckless deregulation pushed through without adequate consideration for public safety consequences. They argue that removing these barriers will lead to increased gun violence, make law enforcement's job harder, and put dangerous weapons in the hands of people who shouldn't have them. Either way, one thing is absolutely clear. This isn't the end of the story. State governments are already moving to fill the regulatory gap. California, New York, Illinois, and other states with strict gun control laws are introducing legislation to ban braced pistols, forced reset triggers, and other items at the state level, trying to lock down what the federal system just released. At the same time, new lawsuits are brewing from both sides. Some Second Amendment groups are preparing challenges to the very existence of the National Firearms Act itself, arguing that now that key provisions have been gutted or overturned, the entire framework is constitutionally suspect. Gun control groups are filing suits claiming the regulatory rollbacks violate administrative procedure law and were implemented without proper public comment periods or environmental and safety reviews. If you've stuck with me this far, you understand that what's being sold as Trump-approved 5 new guns is a fundamental misrepresentation of what actually happened. This wasn't about individual firearms getting approval. This was about dismantling significant portions of the federal regulatory apparatus that's controlled civilian gun ownership since the 1930s. Whether you believe that's a long overdue correction of unconstitutional overreach or a dangerous abandonment of sensible gun safety measures, the fact remains that the landscape has changed dramatically. Entire categories of firearms and accessories that were either prohibited or so heavily regulated that they were effectively inaccessible to ordinary Americans are now available with far fewer barriers. The financial penalties are gone or reduced. The waiting periods are shortened. The arbitrary enforcement is being replaced with clearer guidelines, and the market is responding with innovation, production increases, and expanded civilian access that we haven't seen in generations. For gun owners, this represents either the restoration of rights that should never have been infringed or a dangerous expansion of access to weapons of war, depending on your perspective. For the firearms industry, it's a gold rush. New products, new markets, pent-up demand finally being released. For law enforcement, it's a new reality where more people have access to more powerful, more compact, and faster cycling weapons than ever before. And for policymakers, it's a battleground where federal deregulation meets state-level resistance, where constitutional arguments collide with public safety concerns, and where the next phase of America's endless gun debate is being written right now. Here's what you need to understand moving forward. The regulatory framework that governed American gun ownership for 90 years is being rewritten in real time. The changes that happened in 2025 and are taking full effect now in 2026 represent the most significant shift in federal firearms policy since the National Firearms Act itself. These aren't minor tweaks. These aren't administrative adjustments. These are fundamental changes to who can own what, how much it costs, how long it takes, and what legal risks you face for exercising Second Amendment rights. And none of this is settled. State legislatures are passing new restrictions. Federal courts are hearing new challenges. The ATF is still writing new guidance documents and revising old interpretations. Gun rights groups are pushing for even more deregulation. Gun control advocates are mobilizing for legislative fights at every level of government. The only certainty is that the fight isn't over. It's just entering a new phase with new battle lines and new stakes. So, no, Trump didn't approve 5 specific guns. What he did, what his administration did, what Congress enabled, what the courts allowed, was far more consequential than any list of approved models could ever be. They tore out major sections of the regulatory wall that's defined American gun policy for a century, and now millions of Americans are walking through. Whether you think that's freedom restored or chaos unleashed, you can't deny the reality. The rules have changed, the gates are open, and 2026 is shaping up to be unlike any year in modern firearms history. If this breakdown cut through the noise and gave you the real story instead of the headline bait, do something for me right now. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, share this video with everyone you know who's trying to make sense of what's actually happening with gun laws in this country. This channel exists because the mainstream narrative, whether it's coming from gun rights advocates or gun control groups, is almost always incomplete, often misleading, and sometimes outright false. My job is to give you the facts, the context, and the legal reality so you can form your own informed opinion instead of just reacting to whatever headline crosses your feed. We don't do fear tactics here. We don't do partisan cheerleading. We do straight, no-nonsense coverage of the cases, the rulings, the legislation, and the policies that actually affect your rights and your safety. Subscribe now, because this story isn't finished. The regulatory rollbacks are still unfolding. The legal challenges are just beginning. The state-level responses are accelerating. And if you want to stay ahead of what's coming instead of always reacting to what just happened, this is where you need to be. Hit subscribe, stay informed, and let's cut through the bullshit together.